What's up, you knuckleheads? This is Josh, and today we are going to look at the different comp combinations that have emerged in my playing of Set 7 on the PvE. These are the comps that are probably going to be staples of Set 7 going forward. In terms of strength and weakness, I'm not really going to comment on that, as balance changes are going to affect the relative strength and weakness. These are just sort of the general types of comps that I have seen emerge as being very strong in the PvE. More are going to come out as more and more players get to play Set 7, but just going into Set 7, if you need comps that are going to be strong and consistent to get early LP, here are some comps for the early and the late game. And if you like this teamfight tactics content and you want to see more on this channel, go ahead and click the like and the subscribe. That lets me know that people want to see teamfight tactics content, and I'll keep putting it out there. So we'll start off with the early game, because I feel like a lot of people overlook the early game and just kind of grab whatever is available and whatever they can 2-star. And that's perfectly fine, but there are some early game comps that you can get and use them to transition to mid and late game comps. By letting the shop in terms of items and units sort of dictate what your comp is going to be, you can build out and hopefully get early advantages, transition those into good late game comps, and get a lot of LP. That's what's been helping me get into Plat and Diamond every set since Set 1. So what I'm going to do is give you the comp as well as the units that it's in, the types of items that would go well with it, and then highlight the units within the comp that are going to be most important, the ones that you need to be hitting on. And since we're in the early game, you don't really need to be looking to hard roll any of these other than the Astral comp, which is the first one up. I'll explain that in a minute. But generally, the units that are listed at the beginning are the most important ones and the ones you should be looking to prioritize. So we will start off with that Astral comp, which is a re-roll focused comp. You want to be getting as many Namis, Flowis, Vlads, and Varises as possible, in particular Nami and Vladimir at the early stages. Skarner and Nidalees, they can be good, but unless they get buffed in the future, they're pretty weak going into Set 7. This is a very good comp for if you're hitting a lot of Astrals in your shops early, or if you've got some AP or mana items. Second up is the Warrior comp, which can be a reroll comp if you're hitting on a lot of Yones and you have the appropriate items for him. Otherwise, getting Olaf, Shen, Nunu, and then at the very end, Aatrox, Sejuani, and Swain. These are very good units for the Warrior comp. Swain actually can be very good if you do a Shapeshifter comp, but in general, you want the Olafs and the Yones early. Now, Dragonmancers early on are a very tank-focused comp. If you've got a lot of defensive items, you should be using those on champions like Set and Shen, and have backline damage with Senna and Ashe. These aren't units that can carry particularly well, but in the early game, if you've got a good front line on Dragonmancers, they can be very effective. For Assassins, it's a bit of an odd grouping because you actually don't want to prioritize a lot of the early game Assassins like Kayn. He's actually not very good. If you can get Kiana's, that's very good, but she's not a very good late game carry, so you shouldn't focus putting a lot of items onto her or trying to go for a 3-star Kiana. Instead, get some warriors like Shen and Olaf to hold a lot of those items until you can get a Talon later on. The Jade comp is actually the one that allows you to pivot into the Shapeshifter comp. You should prioritize getting Ashe and Swain. Swain won't be needed if you go into a pure Jade comp late game. Nara and Taric will be important, but this comp is very flexible in terms of the items you get. If you've got attack speed, AP, or even some AD items, that would be very good to go into for Jade. Like I said, there's a lot of flexibility down the line depending on the items and the units that you're getting. Finally, the last early game comp is really the one that's meant for when you have a lot of AD like BF swords. This would be the Cannoneers. Put them on Tristana and get the trainer bonus going as soon as possible so you can get Nomzi big and strong as early as possible. You don't necessarily need to go trainers in the late game from this comp, but it is a good early game staple to have. A strong Nomzi can carry you through the early and mid game. So those are your early game comps, but the question is, once you get the early game comps, what do you transition them into? And generally, this is the sort of decision tree that I like to make, starting with the Astrals. If you have a lot of pure AP items, I would say go into an Astral Evoker comp based around Aurelion Soul. If you've got more mana and crit items, for instance, if you get the Jeweled Gauntlet Infinity Edge combo, that would be good on either Nami or Rise. In any of these 3 iterations that you go from Astral, I would say put the AP items on Nami to either hold if you get a 3-star her, or to sell and put them onto either Rise or Asol. The final iteration of this comp is basically if you thought you were going to get more AP items, but you end up getting a lot of AD down the line, either from carousels or from shops. In that case, transition to a Whisper Bruiser comp, put the AP and defensive items onto Silas, and put the AD items onto Siphon. Now, if you started off Warriors and you got the items that you needed, you're probably going to go Mirage Warriors. This means that you're going to either have Yone or Yasuo as your primary carry. Yone, if you manage to 3-star him, that's great. You can just go ahead and run that as your primary carry. If you get more AD champions, I would say look to transition those to Yasuo. Attack speed items are better for Yone, not as much for Yasuo, but things like Infinity Edge, Giant Slayer, those are going to work on both. And then your tank items, they can go on Nunu, Hecarim, even DJ if you want. Now, Dragonmancers, as I mentioned before, does actually have the ability to become a kind of hyper roll comp. If you're getting a lot of Sets and Shens early on, you can go to this Ragewing Dragonmancers comp with Set and Shen as your two early tanky carries, and then Shyvana being your late game carry. I would say put the Shyvana items onto like a Zaya if you can get them, or even a Swain. And speaking of Swain, you can also transition the Dragonmancer early game comp into a Shapeshifter comp, which is based around Swain, but it also contains some strong carries like Nico and Yasuo late game. I would say prioritize getting those AD items onto Swain early, and if you can't manage to 3-star him or you manage to 2-star Yasuo, just go ahead and flip those items over to him. And AP items onto Nico. Now, that assassin start can actually build into 4 different types of assassin comps. Most of them are based around Talon, but 2 of them are based around Diana and Kiana, and there's also the possibility to transition the assassin start into a Bruiser comp. Which assassin comp you go is basically going to depend on whether you can hit a 3-star Diana, a 3-star Kiana, if you're hitting on a lot of Lee Sins, Olafs, or Horns. Starting off with Guild Assassins, this is the bread and butter Talon comp. This is the pure, you've gotten a Talon early and you can stack them up really quick. You're not hitting a lot of Kianas and Dianas. Just go ahead with this comp. It's very standard. You'll get the guild bonus, and you can always sprinkle in the Bard and the Twitch for some extra stats. The Whisper Assassin comp is more of a later game scaling comp, as you're getting the champions like Ornn and Siphon in there, as opposed to the Bard and the Rise. Itemization is really not going to differentiate between which of these 2 comps you're going to go. It's more about which secondary units you're hitting a lot more of. If you're hitting a lot of Hecarims, go Guild, as opposed to if you're hitting a lot of Ornns, you can go Whisper. On the other hand, if you're hitting on a lot of Kianas and you're also hitting on a good amount of Lee Sins early, that's an indication you should go Tempest Assassins. Now, Talon can still be a primary carry in this comp, but if you're hitting a lot of those Kianas and Lee Sins, this is a great comp. It's also a great comp if you manage to get an Ionic Spark, as Kiana is probably one of the best users of that item in the assassin grouping along with Diana. And speaking of Diana, if you're hitting on a lot of Diana, Braum, and Lilia, that is a great indication to go for a Scalescorn assassin comp. Again, the itemization between this and Kiana is kind of the same. It's really going to depend more on, are you hitting more Lee Sins or Olafs? Are you hitting on more Kianas or Dianas? But finally, since the Assassin Open was based a lot more around Warriors and Bruisers, you can transition this into a pure Scalescorn Bruiser comp. If you're hitting on a lot of Olafs, if you're hitting on a lot of those Scalescorns, but not necessarily getting the crit items, this is a great way to go. If you have just pure AD or pure attack speed for Olaf, that's perfect. And Silas, he can take just about any one of the defensive items and be a strong frontline. From the Jade Open, like I said, the primary comp you're going to go off of this is the Shapeshifter comp. Swain, if you got the AD and attack speed items, that's going to be great for him. Defensive items on Hecarim. This is a great comp to go. Shyvana can be a fantastic late game carry. If you don't manage the 3-star Swain, just transition those items to Shyvana and let her carry, which is a really good thing because I really like comps where you can shoot for a 3-star, and if you miss, you still have a backup late game who can take those same items and use them very well. The Jade Open can also transition to a Guild Swiftshots comp based around Zaya. Again, this is one that if you have extra items, they can go on a Shyvana, but you have great synergy with the Swiftshots, matching the Twitch with the Zaya, adding a Bard, adding a Sejuani with a Hecarim. It's a perfectly balanced comp, as all things should be, and Shyvana can still be a good late game insurance. Then there is the Jade Dragon comp. This is an Aushin comp. if you have the Jewel Gauntlet Infinity Edge combo or just a lot of raw AP, this can be a great transition for it. You also have Ornn, who's one of the best tanks in the late game, who can hold all of the late game items, as well as being able to utilize Bard and Sona, who are two champions that I feel like are just purely strong and can go into just about any comp. Finally, we have our Bill Gates comp of set 7. This is the high value Aurelion Sol comp. This is basically just sort of the same as Ao Shin, but in my opinion, it's just plain better because you manage to get the Soraka and the Bard and the Sona all in there and utilize them perfectly. It's got a Nico. Obviously, this is going to take a long time to come online, but if you manage to just hit on a lot of those high value units in the late game, like you hit a Sona, a Bard, and a Soraka very early, go for Asol over Ao Shin. In truth, he is the better carry unit, and Ao Shin really you're only going for if you really just can't hit an Aurelion Sol. And finally, from the Cannoneer start, there's really two directions you can go. The first one is the Revels, which is a Corki-based comp. Corki is the strongest Cannoneer, so this has some obvious synergy. It also has the Ornn frontline, which as I discussed is very, very strong. And Sona, being a part of this comp, just makes it even stronger, as well as the ability to flex in the Bard later down the line if you want it. Finally, the Legend Trainers is a bit of an odd comp. It's based around the Legends, who I've kind of said are a bit hit and miss in my mind, but if you can manage to get a bunch of Volley Bearers and a bunch of Ornns, it's very, very strong. It has a lot of high value late game units like Soraka and Bard, and it's great if you get a lot of AD and attack speed comps, but you somehow miss on Corkis, or maybe you just don't get the mana items that Corki does need. So that is it. Those are all of the comps that have emerged as very strong in set 7 PvE, how you can set them all up in the early game, and how to transition them into the mid to late game. Guys, if you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I will be sure to answer as many as I can. And if people do like this TFT content, I'll probably do some more stuff with it throughout set 7. But that's all for me. Take it easy, you knuckleheads. Josh out.